The taser crackled through the courtroom like lightning splitting stone. Audrey Mitchell's body seized, muscles locking, knees buckling. She collapsed onto the polished wooden floor of courtroom 4B in the King County Courthouse, Seattle. Her navy dress whites, decorated with service ribbons and insignia, crumpled beneath her. The sound echoed off marble walls built to witness justice, not brutality. Officer Derek Vaughn stood over her, taser still extended, his face twisted with satisfaction. He didn't pull the trigger by accident. He chose it. He aimed it. He fired it in front of 47 witnesses, 2 bailiffs, 1 judge, and 4 cameras that caught every frame of what happened next. What Vaughn didn't know was that the woman convulsing on the floor wasn't just a veteran. She was a decorated Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete Bud-S training, and someone who had survived combat zones he couldn't imagine. And what he definitely didn't know was that in exactly 4 minutes, his decision to tase her would cost him everything, including his life. The hearing was supposed to be routine. A motion to dismiss charges against Audrey Mitchell, 31, who had been arrested 3 months earlier for resisting arrest. The original incident happened outside a grocery store in the Central District. Vaughn had pulled her over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. When she questioned why he was asking her to step out of the vehicle, he escalated. When she asked for his badge number, he grabbed her arm. When she pulled away, he slammed her against the hood of her car and cuffed her so tight her wrists bled. The charges? Resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Both fabricated. Both about to be dismissed because Audrey's attorney, Jeffrey Bennett, had pulled surveillance footage from 3 different angles showing Vaughn lied in every line of his report. That morning, Audrey walked into the courthouse alone. No family, no media, no crowd of supporters, just her in her dress whites. Because she wanted the court to see exactly who she was, a woman who had served her country with honor, while men like Vaughn hid behind badges and lied on reports. She moved through the metal detectors with calm precision. Her posture was military straight, her expression unreadable. Security waved her through without issue. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, her polished shoes clicking against marble, her breathing steady and controlled. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was cold and sterile. Rows of wooden benches stretched toward the judge's bench like pews in a chapel of law. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A few people sat scattered in the gallery. Some were there for other cases. Others had heard about this hearing and came to watch. Among them was Tyrone Jackson, 43, a community organizer who had been tracking Vaughn's pattern of misconduct for 2 years. He sat in the 3rd row, notebook open, pen ready. Beside him was Jessica Morgan, 29, a journalist for the Seattle Observer who had written extensively about police violence in black neighborhoods. Her phone was on the bench beside her, ready to record if needed. Audrey sat at the defense table beside Jeffrey Bennett, a sharp-eyed attorney in his mid-50s with silver streaking his temples and a reputation for dismantling bad cops on the stand. He leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded once but didn't smile. At the prosecution table sat Amanda Pierce, 38, a career prosecutor who looked uncomfortable. She shuffled papers without reading them, her jaw tight. This case had been a problem from the start. Vaughn's report didn't match the video. His testimony didn't match witness statements, and now she was stuck defending charges everyone knew were false. Judge Harold Preston entered from his chambers, black robe flowing behind him. He was 62, gray-haired, stern-faced, and known for running a tight courtroom. Everyone rose. He sat, they sat. The hearing began. But before Jeffrey could even stand to present his motion, the courtroom doors swung open. Officer Derek Vaughn walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't scheduled to testify. He wasn't called as a witness. But there he was, in full uniform, badge gleaming, utility belt heavy with equipment, and a look on his face that said he owned the room. Beside him walked Officer Ryan Caldwell, 34, Vaughn's partner and enabler. Caldwell's eyes scanned the room, landing on Audrey with a flicker of recognition and contempt. Judge Preston looked up sharply. "Officer Vaughn, you're not on the docket today. Why are you in my courtroom?" Vaughn stopped halfway down the aisle. "Your Honor, I'm here to ensure the safety of this proceeding. Given the defendant's history of violence, I felt it was necessary to provide additional security." Jeffrey shot to his feet. "Objection. That's a false characterization and an attempt to intimidate my client. Ms. Mitchell has no history of violence. She's a decorated Navy SEAL with an exemplary service record. Vaughn smirked. A SEAL, huh? That makes her more dangerous, not less. The courtroom went silent. Audrey didn't move. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded on the table, her jaw set. Judge Preston's voice cut through the tension. Officer Vaughn, you will take a seat in the gallery or you will leave. You have no jurisdiction in this courtroom. Bailiff escorted him to the back, but Vaughn didn't move. Instead, he took 2 steps closer to the defense table. Caldwell followed. I'm not leaving, Vaughn said. This woman assaulted me. She resisted lawful commands. And now she's sitting here in a costume pretending to be a hero. Audrey's fingers twitched. Just once, but she didn't speak. Jeffrey's voice rose. Your Honor, I move for immediate removal of this officer. He's disrupting the court and attempting to intimidate the defendant. Judge Preston slammed his gavel. Officer Vaughn, you are in contempt. Bailiff, remove him now. 2 bailiffs moved toward Vaughn, but he raised a hand. I'm going, he said. But before I do, I want everyone here to know what kind of person we're dealing with. He turned and pointed directly at Audrey. That woman is a threat. She's violent. She's aggressive. And she's a liar. Audrey stood, slowly, smoothly. Her movements controlled, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She simply said, I have never lied, and I have never been violent except in defense of my country. Vaughn's face flushed red. You think you're special because you wore a uniform? You think that gives you the right to disrespect law enforcement? Audrey's eyes locked onto his. I think it gives me the right to expect law enforcement to tell the truth. And that's when Vaughn snapped. He lunged forward, shoving past the bailiff, reaching for Audrey. Caldwell moved with him. The courtroom erupted. People shouted. The judge yelled. Jeffrey stepped between them. But Vaughn was faster. He grabbed Audrey's arm, yanking her toward him. She twisted, breaking his grip with a move so smooth it looked effortless. Vaughn stumbled back, surprised. Then his hand went to his belt. He drew his taser. Stop, Judge Preston roared. Officer, stand down! But Vaughn didn't stop. His finger found the trigger. The prongs shot out, wires trailing behind them. They hit Audrey square in the chest. Electricity surged through her body. 50,000 volts. Her muscles seized. Her body convulsed. She dropped. The courtroom froze. Jessica Morgan's phone was already recording. Tyrone Jackson was on his feet shouting. Jeffrey rushed to Audrey's side. Amanda Pierce stood at the prosecution table, mouth open in horror. And Judge Preston, his face purple with rage, pointed at Vaughn and said the words that should have ended it right there. You are under arrest. Bailiffs, detain that man immediately. But before anyone could move, Caldwell drew his weapon, a Glock 22 standard issue. He didn't point it at the bailiffs. He pointed it at Audrey, still twitching on the floor. Nobody move, Caldwell barked, or I'll put her down for good. And that's when the situation went from bad to catastrophic. Officer Nina Flores, the lead bailiff, had been a Marine before she became court security. She moved faster than Caldwell expected. She drew her weapon, a Sig Sauer P320, and aimed it directly at Caldwell's center mass. Drop the weapon, she commanded. Now, Caldwell hesitated. Vaughn looked between them, his face pale, realizing for the first time that he might have miscalculated. From the back of the courtroom, another voice rang out. Seattle PD! Drop your weapons immediately. Officer Brandon Hayes stood at the entrance, weapon drawn. Backup flooding in behind him. 4 officers. All armed, all aimed at Vaughn and Caldwell. Tyrone Jackson whispered to Jessica, Are you getting this? She nodded, phone steady. Every second, Audrey, still on the floor, began to move slowly, her fingers curled. Her breathing steadied. The taser's effects were wearing off faster than they should have. SEAL training had conditioned her body to recover quickly from pain, from shock, from situations most people couldn't survive. Jeffrey knelt beside her. Don't move, he said quietly. Let them handle this. But Audrey's eyes were open now, clear, focused. She looked at Vaughn, still holding the spent taser. She looked at Caldwell, gun wavering in his hand, and she made a decision. She pushed herself up, slowly, carefully, her body still trembling from the residual current, but her will unshaken. Stay down, Caldwell shouted, swinging his weapon toward her. That's when everything happened at once. Nina Flores fired, not at Caldwell, at the ceiling. A warning shot that cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Plaster rained down. Everyone ducked. Caldwell spun toward the sound. Brandon Hayes rushed forward. Vaughn tried to run, and Audrey, moving on instinct and training, swept Caldwell's legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, his weapon skittering across the floor. She pinned him with one knee, her hand on his wrist, her voice cold and steady. "You're done." Vaughn made it 3 steps before Brandon tackled him. They went down together, Vaughn thrashing, Brandon cuffing him with practiced efficiency. The courtroom was chaos. People screaming. Bailiffs shouting commands. Judge Preston yelling for order. But in the center of it all, Audrey Mitchell stood, breathing hard, uniform wrinkled, taser marks visible on her chest, but standing. She looked at Vaughn, face down on the floor, hands cuffed behind his back. She looked at Caldwell, subdued and disarmed. And then she looked at Judge Preston, who stared back at her with something between shock and respect. "Your Honor," Jeffrey said, his voice shaking with adrenaline, "I move to dismiss all charges against my client, and I move for immediate charges against Officer Vaughn for assault, use of excessive force, and contempt of court." Judge Preston nodded slowly. Motion granted. "All charges against Ms. Mitchell are dismissed. And Officer Vaughn, you are hereby charged with assault with a deadly weapon, abuse of authority, and contempt. Bail is denied." Vaughn thrashed against the cuffs. "You can't do this. I'm a cop. I was doing my job." Judge Preston's voice was ice. "You were committing a crime. In my courtroom. In front of witnesses. You're finished." As Brandon and another officer dragged Vaughn toward the exit, he screamed over his shoulder, "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over." But it was. And what no one in that courtroom knew yet was that Vaughn's words would prove prophetic in the worst possible way. Because 4 days later, when Vaughn was released on a technicality pending investigation, he would make one final, fatal decision. He would come for Audrey Mitchell one last time, and that decision would end with him on the ground, bleeding out, staring up at the woman he had tried to destroy. 4 days. That's how long it took for the system to fail again. Derek Vaughn walked out of King County Jail on a procedural error. His attorney, a bulldog named Richard Novak, had found a loophole in the bail hearing process. Judge Preston's order had been overturned by an appellate judge who ruled that Vaughn's rights had been violated because he hadn't been given adequate time to prepare a defense before being denied bail. Was legal nonsense. Everyone knew it. But the law didn't care about everyone. It cared about procedure, and procedure set Vaughn free. Audrey heard the news while she was at the VA hospital in Seattle, visiting a fellow veteran who had lost both legs in Kandahar. Her phone buzzed. Jeffrey's name lit up the screen. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. "He's out," Jeffrey said without preamble. "Bail reversal. He posted bond an hour ago." Audrey closed her eyes. "For how long?" "Until the trial. Could be months." She didn't respond right away. In the background, she could hear machines beeping, nurses talking, the familiar sounds of a place where people fought to stay alive. "Are you safe?" Jeffrey asked. "I'm always safe," Audrey said, but the edge in her voice said something else. "Audrey, listen to me. This man is dangerous. He's humiliated, he's facing prison, and he blames you for all of it. You need protection." "I am protection," she replied. Jeffrey sighed. "I'm serious. Let me contact SPD, get you a security detail." "No cops," Audrey said flatly. "I don't trust them." "Then trust me." "Let me help." Audrey leaned against the wall, her head tilted back, eyes on the flickering fluorescent light above. "I'll be fine, Jeffrey. Just keep me updated." She hung up before he could argue further. Outside the hospital, the Seattle rain fell in sheets. Audrey stood under the overhang, watching water cascade off the edges, thinking about Vaughn, about the courtroom, about the look in his eyes when he pulled that taser. She had seen that look before. In Afghanistan. In men who believed they were untouchable. Men who thought power was a right, not a responsibility. And she had seen what happened when those men were finally held accountable. They didn't go quietly. Audrey pulled her jacket tighter and walked into the rain. Derek Vaughn sat in his apartment in South Seattle, staring at his service weapon on the coffee table. A Glock 22. Fully loaded, 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. He hadn't been officially stripped of his badge yet. Procedure again. Technicalities. He was on administrative leave. but his access hadn't been revoked. Across from him sat Ryan Caldwell, nursing a beer, his face still bruised from being slammed to the courtroom floor. Caldwell had been suspended without pay. His union rep said he'd probably be fired within the week. All because of her. "We should leave town," Caldwell said. "Lay low until this blows over." Vaughn didn't look at him. "It's not going to blow over." "Then what are you going to do?" Vaughn picked up the Glock, checked the chamber, set it back down. "I'm going to finish what I started." Caldwell sat forward. "Derek, don't be stupid. You're already looking at years. If you go after her—" "If I go after her," Vaughn interrupted, "then at least I go down on my terms." Caldwell stood, pacing. "You don't even know where she lives." Vaughn smiled. "Didn't say I did, but I know where she'll be." He pulled out his phone and opened a social media app. It took him less than 5 minutes to find what he was looking for. A post from Tyrone Jackson, the community organizer who had been in the courtroom. It was a flyer for a town hall meeting scheduled for that evening at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute in the Central District. The topic, police accountability and community safety, and listed as a featured speaker, Audrey Mitchell. Vaughn turned the phone toward Caldwell. "There." Caldwell stared at the screen, his face pale. "You can't be serious." Vaughn stood, sliding the Glock into his waistband. "I've never been more serious in my life." "Ryan, you don't have to do this." Vaughn looked at him. "Yes, I do." Caldwell watched him walk toward the door, keys in hand, gun concealed under his jacket. He thought about calling someone, a supervisor, a friend, anyone. But he didn't. Instead, he sat back down, finished his beer, and told himself it wasn't his problem anymore. The Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute was a historic venue in Seattle's Central District, a neighborhood that had been the heart of the city's black community for generations. The building was warm, filled with voices, energy, and people who had come to talk about change. Audrey arrived early. She wasn't used to public speaking. Combat, yes. Briefings, yes. But standing in front of a crowd and talking about what happened to her, that was different, harder in some ways. Tyrone Jackson met her at the entrance. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming," he said. "People need to hear your story." "I'm not here to be a symbol," Audrey said. "I'm here because someone has to say it." Tyrone nodded. "That's exactly why you're the right person." Inside, the theater was filling up. Rows of red velvet seats stretched toward a wooden stage. A podium stood in the center, microphone ready. Behind it, a projector displayed the words, "Justice delayed is justice denied." Jessica Morgan was there, camera in hand, notebook open. She waved at Audrey from the second row. Beside her sat a mix of community members, activists, students, and people who had their own stories of being stopped, questioned, brutalized, or ignored by police who saw them as threats instead of citizens. Audrey sat backstage, breathing slowly, centering herself the way she had before missions. Focus on the objective. Control what you can. Adapt to what you can't. A young woman, maybe 23, poked her head through the curtain. "Ms. Mitchell, we're ready for you." Audrey stood, straightened her jacket, and walked onto the stage. The applause was immediate. Not loud, not performative, but genuine. She stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the faces staring back at her. "My name is Audrey Mitchell," she began. "And 4 days ago I was tasered in a courtroom by a cop who decided I didn't deserve respect." The room went silent. She told them everything. The traffic stop, the lies, the arrest, the courtroom, the taser. She spoke without notes, without emotion, just facts delivered with the precision of someone who had learned to compartmentalize pain. When she finished, the room erupted, not in applause but in recognition. People stood, some shouted, others wiped their eyes. One man in the back yelled, "That's every one of us!" Tyrone took the stage beside her. "This is what we're fighting," he said. "Not just bad cops, a system that protects them." The Q&A lasted 30 minutes. People asked about accountability, about reform, about what they could do. Audrey answered each question with the same steady calm she had carried through the courtroom. And then someone asked the question that changed the temperature in the room. "Ms. Mitchell, do you feel safe?" Audrey paused. Honest answer? No. But I've never felt completely safe. Not as a black woman in America. Not as a SEAL in a war zone. Safety is something you create, not something you're given. The audience nodded. But Audrey's eyes had drifted toward the back of the theater, toward the exit, toward a figure standing in the shadows just outside the doorway. She couldn't see his face, but she knew. Tyrone noticed her distraction. "You okay?" Audrey didn't answer. She stepped away from the podium, moving toward the side of the stage. "Get everyone out," she said quietly. "What?" Audrey's voice was sharp now. "Get everyone out, now." Tyrone didn't question her. He grabbed the microphone. "Everyone, we need to evacuate calmly. Use the side exits, move quickly, but don't run." The crowd hesitated, confused. Then they saw Audrey's face, and they moved. Jessica was one of the last to leave. She looked back at Audrey, still standing on the stage, watching the doors. "What's happening?" Audrey didn't answer. She just pointed toward the exit. "Go." Jessica went. Within 3 minutes, the theater was empty. Just Audrey, standing alone on the stage, staring at the door where the figure had been, and then the door opened. Derek Vaughn stepped inside. He was in civilian clothes now. Jeans, a jacket, baseball cap pulled low. But his hand was under the jacket, and Audrey knew what he was holding. "You couldn't just let it go," Vaughn said, his voice echoing in the empty theater. "You had to make me the villain." Audrey didn't move. "You made yourself the villain." Vaughn walked down the aisle, slow and deliberate. "I've been a cop for 15 years. 15 years of dealing with people like you. People who think the rules don't apply to them." Audrey's voice was calm. "I never broke a rule. You did." Vaughn laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You really believe that, don't you? You think because you wore a uniform, because you killed people overseas, that makes you better than me? I think it makes me someone who understands the difference between authority and power." Vaughn stopped 10 feet from the stage. His hand was still under his jacket. "You humiliated me, in front of everyone. You took everything from me." Audrey took 1 step forward. "I didn't take anything. You gave it away the moment you decided I didn't matter." Vaughn's face twisted. "You don't matter, none of you do." And then he pulled the gun. The Glock came out smooth, practiced the movement of someone who had drawn a weapon 1,000 times. Vaughn held it steady, aimed at Audrey's chest, his finger resting on the trigger guard. The empty theater amplified every sound. The hum of the ventilation system, the creak of old wooden floorboards. Vaughn's breathing heavy and uneven. Audrey didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of the stage, arms loose at her sides, eyes locked on Vaughn. She had stared down worse than him. In Fallujah, she had cleared buildings filled with insurgents. In Kandahar, she had held her position while mortars fell around her. A man with a gun in an empty theater? That was just another problem to solve. "You think you're brave," Vaughn said, his voice shaking with rage. "Standing there like you're untouchable. But you're not. You bleed just like anyone else." "Everyone bleeds," Audrey said evenly. "Even you." Vaughn took another step closer. "You cost me everything. My job, my reputation, my life. You did that to yourself." "No." Vaughn's voice cracked. "You did it. You and your lawyer and that judge. You all decided I was the bad guy." Audrey's voice stayed calm, measured, the tone of someone who had been trained to de-escalate hostile situations. "You tasered me in a courtroom, Derek, in front of a judge. In front of witnesses. You made that choice. Because you wouldn't shut up." Vaughn's gun hand trembled. "You kept pushing. You kept acting like you were better than me. I never said I was better than you. You didn't have to say it. It was in every look, every word, every time you stood there in that uniform like you were some kind of hero." Audrey took a slow breath. "I'm a hero. I served my country. I protected people who couldn't protect themselves. What did you do, Derek? You bullied people, you lied, you abused your power." Vaughn's face flushed red. "I protected people too. Every day, every shift. While people like you spit on cops and act like we're the enemy. I never spit on anyone, Audrey said. But I won't pretend you're a hero just because you wore a badge. Vaughn raised the gun higher, his finger moving to the trigger. Maybe I'm not a hero, but at least I won't die alone in some forgotten theater. If you pull that trigger, Audrey said quietly, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Or you'll die here. Either way you lose. Vaughn's hand wavered. Then I guess we both lose. Outside the theater, Tyrone Jackson was on the phone with 911. Dispatcher, we have an active shooter situation at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute. Armed suspect inside with a civilian. Send units now. The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. Units are on the way. Can you confirm the identity of the shooter? It's Officer Derek Vaughn, Seattle PD. He's inside with Audrey Mitchell. Copy that. Officers are 3 minutes out. Do not enter the building. But Tyrone was already moving toward the entrance. Jessica grabbed his arm. Don't, you can't help her if you're dead. Tyrone hesitated, torn between action and caution. Then he heard it. A single gunshot, muffled but unmistakable, echoing from inside the theater. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Tyrone shoved through the door. Inside the theater, smoke drifted from the barrel of Vaughn's Glock. But Audrey was still standing. The bullet had gone wide, punching into the wooden stage floor 3 feet to her left. Vaughn stared at the gun in his hand, then at Audrey, his face a mask of confusion and fury. You missed, Audrey said. Vaughn's hand shook. I wasn't trying to miss. Yes, you were. Audrey took a step forward. If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead. But you don't want me dead, Derek. You want someone to blame. Someone to make sense of why your life fell apart. And that someone is me. Vaughn backed up, the gun still raised, but his resolve crumbling. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Audrey's voice was firm now, commanding. I've seen men like you before. Men who thought they were invincible until someone held them accountable, and every single one of them had the same look you have right now. Fear. I'm not afraid of you. You're terrified, not of me, of yourself, of what you've become. Vaughn's eyes glistened. You don't get to psychoanalyze me. Then put the gun down and walk away. Vaughn shook his head. I can't, it's too late. It's not too late. Audrey took another step. You haven't killed anyone. You fired one shot and missed. Put the gun down, Derek, walk out of here. Face the charges. Do your time. But don't throw your life away because you're too proud to admit you were wrong. For a moment, Vaughn's gun hand lowered. Just a fraction. His eyes met Audrey's, and in that split second, she saw something flicker, doubt, regret, maybe even recognition that she was right. But then the door burst open. Tyrone Jackson rushed in, breathless, eyes wide. Audrey, are you? Vaughn spun toward the sound. The gun came back up. Tyrone froze. Get out, Vaughn shouted. Get out or I'll shoot you both. Tyrone raised his hands. Okay, I'm leaving. But Vaughn's attention was divided now. His eyes darted between Audrey and Tyrone. His finger twitched on the trigger. The moment of doubt was gone, replaced by panic. Audrey moved. She had been trained for this. Close quarters combat, disarmament, neutralization. Her body responded before her brain finished processing the decision. She launched off the stage, covering the 10 feet between her and Vaughn in less than 2 seconds. Her hand shot out, grabbing the barrel of the Glock and twisting it upward. Vaughn's finger jerked the trigger. The gun fired. The shot went high, punching through the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Audrey's other hand came up, slamming into Vaughn's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Vaughn swung wildly, his fist connecting with Audrey's jaw. Her head snapped back, but she didn't go down. She pivoted, driving her elbow into his ribs. Vaughn gasped, doubling over. Tyrone scrambled for the gun, kicking it away from Vaughn's reach. But Vaughn wasn't finished. He lunged at Audrey, tackling her to the ground. They hit the floor hard, Vaughn's hands reaching for her throat. Audrey brought her knee up, driving it into his stomach. Vaughn grunted, his grip loosening. She rolled, reversing their positions, pinning him beneath her. Stay down, she commanded. Vaughn thrashed, trying to throw her off. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? Audrey's voice was cold. It's over, Derek. It's not over until I say it's over. He reached for something on his belt. A backup weapon. A small revolver, a snub-nosed .38 he had tucked into an ankle holster. He pulled it free, swinging it toward Audrey's face. Tyrone shouted a warning. Audrey reacted. Her hand shot out, grabbing Vaughn's wrist, forcing the barrel away from her. Her other hand struck his throat, a precise blow that cut off his air. Vaughn's eyes bulged. The revolver wavered, and then the doors burst open again. Officer Brandon Hayes led the response team. 4 officers, weapons drawn, moving in tactical formation. "Freeze! Drop the weapon!" Vaughn's revolver was still in his hand, still pointed vaguely in Audrey's direction. "Drop it now," Hayes barked. But Vaughn didn't drop it. His eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto Audrey's. "If I'm going down," he rasped, "you're coming with me." He tried to pull the trigger. 3 shots rang out, simultaneous, deafening in the enclosed space. Vaughn's body jerked. Once, twice, 3 times. Blood bloomed across his chest, spreading in dark, wet patches. The revolver slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. His eyes went wide, then distant. He slumped back, his body going limp beneath Audrey. She pushed herself off him, breathing hard, her hands shaking from adrenaline. Blood spattered her jacket, her hands, her face, but none of it was hers. Officer Hayes moved forward, weapons still trained on Vaughn's motionless form. "Subject down. Get EMS in here now." Tyrone stood frozen, staring at the scene. Jessica Morgan appeared in the doorway, camera in hand, capturing everything. Audrey stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She looked down at Vaughn. His chest rose once, twice, then stopped. His eyes, still open, stared at nothing. "Is he—" Tyrone started. "He's gone," Hayes said quietly. Audrey turned away. She walked toward the stage, her mind already compartmentalizing, already processing what had just happened. She had survived. Vaughn hadn't. That was the reality. "Ms. Mitchell," Hayes called after her. "We need you to stay here. There's going to be an investigation." Audrey nodded without turning around. "I'm not going anywhere." Paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to do. Vaughn was dead before they reached him. The coroner would later confirm that all 3 shots had been fatal, 1 to the chest, 2 to the heart. Clean, professional kills by officers who had been trained to stop threats, not wound them. Audrey sat on the edge of the stage, wrapped in a shock blanket someone had draped over her shoulders. She stared at the red velvet seats, now empty except for the investigators moving through, taking photographs, marking evidence. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area where Vaughn's body had lain before they removed it. Detective Gabrielle Reynolds approached slowly, her badge clipped to her belt, a recorder in her hand. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Reynolds with SPD Homicide. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here." Audrey looked up at her. Dark skin, kind eyes, professional demeanor. "Am I under arrest?" "No, but we need your statement." Officer Hayes and his team fired their weapons. "We need to establish what led to that." Audrey nodded. "He came here to kill me." He pulled a gun. I tried to disarm him. "Your officers did what they had to do." Reynolds sat beside her. "Can you walk me through it?" "From the beginning." So Audrey did. She recounted every moment. Vaughn's arrival, the conversation, the first shot that missed, Tyrone's entrance, the struggle, the backup revolver, the final moments before Hayes and his team fired. Reynolds listened without interrupting, the recorder capturing every word. When Audrey finished, Reynolds asked, "Did you know he had a second weapon?" "Not until he drew it." "Did you have any opportunity to retreat before engaging him?" Audrey met her eyes. "He fired at me. Then he pulled another gun. Retreat wasn't an option." Reynolds nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, every witness supports your account. The officer's body cameras confirm it. You defended yourself, Ms. Mitchell. No one's questioning that." Audrey pulled the blanket tighter. "Then why does it feel like I'm being interrogated?" "Because a man died tonight," Reynolds said gently. "And no matter how justified it was, we have to make sure every detail is documented. That's not about you. That's about the process." "The process," Audrey repeated bitterly. "The same process that let him walk out of jail 4 days ago?" Reynolds didn't have an answer for that. Jeffrey Bennett arrived an hour later, his tie loosened, his face drawn with worry. He pushed through the police line and found Audrey still sitting on the stage, staring at nothing. He sat beside her without speaking, just his presence solid and reassuring. "You okay?" he asked finally. "Define okay." "Are you hurt?" "No." "Then you're okay." Audrey almost smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "He's dead, Jeffrey." "I know. He came here to kill me. And now he's dead, and part of me feels nothing." "Is that wrong?" Jeffrey shook his head. "You're in shock. Give yourself time to process. I've processed worse, not like this. He paused. What happened in Afghanistan in combat, that was war. You were trained for it. Expected it. This was different. This was personal. Audrey turned to look at him. He wanted me to feel guilty. Even in the end, he wanted to take something from me. My peace, my sense of safety, my belief that the system works. The system failed tonight, Jeffrey said quietly. Again. It failed when they let him out. It failed when he walked into this theater. It failed every step of the way. But it didn't fail when those officers shot him. No, Jeffrey agreed. That part worked exactly as it should have. Outside, the media had gathered. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed at the theater entrance, reporters jockeying for position. Jessica Morgan stood among them, but she wasn't filming. She was thinking about what she had seen, the look on Audrey's face when Vaughn pulled that gun. The absolute absence of fear. Just cold hard calculation, Jessica's editor called. Are you getting this? I got it, Jessica said. All of it. Good. We need this up in an hour. Seattle cop shot dead after threatening veteran. That's the headline. Jessica hesitated. That's not the story. Then what is? The story is that a black woman defended herself against a racist cop who came to kill her, and the system only protected her after it almost got her killed. That's the story. Her editor paused. Then that's what you write. Jessica hung up and began typing. Back inside the theater, Officer Brandon Hayes sat in one of the red velvet seats, his hands shaking. He had fired his weapon before in training, once 5 years ago, at a domestic violence suspect who had been threatening his partner with a knife. But nothing like this. Never a kill shot, never 3-round center mass. Never watching a man's life drain out in real time. His sergeant sat beside him. You did the right thing. Hayes nodded, but he didn't believe it yet. Maybe he never would. How's she doing? Hayes asked, nodding toward Audrey. Better than you, his sergeant said. She's been through worse, has she? The sergeant looked at him. She's a SEAL. She's killed enemy combatants in close quarters. This isn't her first time seeing someone die. That doesn't make it easier. No, it just makes her better at hiding it. By midnight, the theater was finally cleared. The crime scene techs had finished their work. The body had been removed. The blood had been photographed but not yet cleaned. That would come later, by professionals who specialized in erasing violence from public spaces. Audrey walked out through the front entrance, Jeffrey beside her, Tyrone and Jessica following behind. The media surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Jeffrey held up a hand. No questions. Ms. Mitchell has given her statement to the police. We have nothing further to say at this time. But one reporter pushed through. Ms. Mitchell, do you regret what happened tonight? Audrey stopped. She turned slowly, looking directly into the camera. I regret that a man felt so entitled to his hatred that he decided to kill me rather than face accountability. I regret that the system released him so he could try, but I don't regret defending myself, and I don't regret being alive. The reporter opened her mouth to ask another question, but Audrey was already walking away. They drove in silence, Jeffrey's car cutting through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. Audrey stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Lights reflected in puddles. People hurried under umbrellas, life continuing as if nothing had happened. Where do you want to go? Jeffrey asked. Home. You sure? You could stay with someone tonight. You shouldn't be alone. I'm always alone, Audrey said. That's how I survive. Jeffrey didn't argue. He drove her to her apartment in Capitol Hill, a modest place on the 3rd floor of an older building. He walked her to the door. You have my number. You call me if you need anything, anytime. Audrey nodded. Thank you, Jeffrey, for everything. He hesitated at the elevator. You saved my life once, he said. In that courtroom, when Caldwell pulled his gun. You didn't have to step in, but you did. That's what I do, I know. And tonight you saved your own life. Remember that when the doubt creeps in. The elevator doors closed, and Audrey was alone. Inside her apartment, everything was exactly as she had left it. Neat, organized, minimal. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo, Audrey in her navy dress whites. Standing between 2 fellow SEALs, all 3 of them grinning, sunburned. Alive, one of those men was dead now, killed in Helmand Province. The other was in Virginia, retired, teaching his kids how to fish, and Audrey was here, still fighting, still surviving. She stripped off her blood-stained clothes and stepped into the shower. The water ran red at first, swirling down the drain, washing away the physical evidence of what had happened. But the rest stayed. The memory, the sound of gunshots, the look in Vaughn's eyes when he realized he was dying. Audrey stood under the water until it ran cold. Then she dried off, dressed in clean clothes, and sat on her couch in the dark. She didn't turn on the TV, didn't check her phone, just sat, breathing, thinking. At some point she must have fallen asleep because when she opened her eyes, sunlight was streaming through the windows. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, 6 voicemails. She ignored them all except one, a text from Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford, her former commanding officer. "Call me when you can. I heard what happened. You okay?" Audrey dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Mitchell." "Sir?" Bradford's voice was gruff but warm. "I saw the news. Saw the footage. You handled it like a professional. Didn't feel professional. It never does." Bradford paused. "You know you don't have to carry this alone, right? There are people who can help. People who understand. I know, sir. Do you? Because I've seen too many good soldiers come home and think they have to be invincible. You're not invincible, Mitchell. You're human. And what happened last night, that'll stay with you. Don't pretend it won't." Audrey closed her eyes. "I'm fine, sir." "That's what they all say." Bradford sighed. "Look, I'm not going to lecture you, but if you need anything, anything at all, you call me, day or night. You hear me?" "I hear you, sir." "Good, now get some rest. The world can wait." He hung up and Audrey was alone again. The story hit national news within 12 hours. Former Seattle police officer shot dead after threatening Navy SEAL veteran. The footage from Jessica Morgan's camera went viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The narrative split predictably along familiar lines. Some called Audrey a hero, others called the officers who shot Vaughn murderers. Some blamed the system for releasing Vaughn in the first place. Others blamed Audrey for being too aggressive, too confrontational, for not de-escalating. Everyone had an opinion. Few had facts, but the facts were clear. Derek Vaughn had entered that theater armed and intent on violence. He had fired his weapon. He had drawn a second weapon. And he had been stopped by officers doing their jobs. The Seattle Police Department held a press conference 48 hours after the shooting. Chief Marcus Lane stood at a podium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. He was a tall man, late 50s, with gray at his temples and the weary look of someone who had spent too many years fighting battles he couldn't win. On the evening of November 14th, Chief Lane began. Officers from the Seattle Police Department responded to an active shooter situation at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute. Upon arrival, officers encountered Officer Derek Vaughn, who was armed and actively threatening civilian Audrey Mitchell. Despite repeated commands to drop his weapons, Officer Vaughn refused. He drew a second firearm and pointed it at Ms. Mitchell. Officers Brandon Hayes, Nina Flores, and Daniel Kim discharged their weapons, fatally wounding Officer Vaughn. A reporter shouted from the back, "Chief, why was Vaughn allowed to post bail after assaulting Ms. Mitchell in court?" Lane's jaw tightened. That decision was made by an appellate judge based on procedural grounds. It was not a decision made by this department, and we have serious concerns about the process that led to his release. Another reporter, "Is Ms. Mitchell being charged with anything?" "No, Ms. Mitchell acted in self-defense. She is a victim in this case, not a suspect." "Will the officers who shot Vaughn face any disciplinary action?" "The shooting is under investigation by our Internal Affairs Division and the King County Sheriff's Office as is standard protocol. However, preliminary findings indicate the officers acted in accordance with department policy and state law. We do not anticipate any charges or disciplinary measures." One more reporter, louder than the rest. "Chief, Officer Vaughn had a history of complaints. Why was he still on the force?" Lane paused. "That's a question we're asking ourselves, and it's a question the community deserves an answer to." After the press conference, Lane returned to his office and closed the door. He sat at his desk, head in his hands, and did something he hadn't done in years. He cried. Not for Vaughn, but for the system, for the failure, for the woman who had nearly died because procedure mattered more than justice. Across town, Ryan Caldwell watched the press conference on a small TV in his basement apartment. He had been suspended without pay. His union rep said there was a chance he could fight the termination, but Caldwell knew better. He was finished. His career was over. His reputation destroyed, all because he had followed Vaughn's lead. He thought about calling someone. His parents. A friend, anyone, but what would he say? That he had watched Vaughn spiral and done nothing? That he had stood by while Vaughn harassed a woman in a courtroom? That he had pointed a gun at that same woman and thought he was in the right? No, there was nothing to say. Caldwell turned off the TV and sat in the dark. Meanwhile, Audrey Mitchell was trying to return to normal. She went to the VA hospital to visit the veteran she had been seeing before everything happened. He was awake, sitting up in bed watching the news. He looked up when she entered. "You're famous," he said with a weak smile. "I didn't want to be. Nobody ever does." He gestured to the TV. "They're calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to die." The veteran nodded slowly. "That's what heroes do, though. They refuse to die." Audrey sat in the chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got blown up." He laughed, then winced. "But I'm alive." "That's something." They sat in silence for a moment. Then the veteran said, "You know, when I came home, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought surviving the war meant I had won. But it's not like that, is it?" "No," Audrey said quietly. "It's not. You keep fighting." "Just different enemies," Audrey nodded. "Different enemies. Same fight." The veteran reached over and squeezed her hand. "You'll be okay, Mitchell. You're tougher than most, so are you." "Yeah, but I had both my legs when I started." He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. Audrey stayed another hour, talking about anything except Vaughn, the theater, the blood. When she finally left, she felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. That evening, Audrey received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Officer Nina Flores. We met in the courtroom." "I remember," Audrey said. Flores's voice was hesitant. "I wanted to call and see how you're doing. I know the last few days have been hell. I'm managing." "Good, that's good." Flores paused. "I also wanted to say thank you for what you did that night. You could have run. Most people would have. But you stayed. You faced him, and you gave us time to get there. I didn't have a choice, Wym, you did, and you made the right one." Flores's voice strengthened. "I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've seen a lot of bad cops. Vaughn was one of the worst. And I'm sorry you had to be the one to stop him. I didn't stop him. Your bullets did. Maybe. But you gave us the chance, and that matters." Audrey didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing she could. "Thank you, Officer Flores. Call me Nina." "Thank you, Nina." After they hung up, Audrey sat on her couch, staring at her phone. For the first time since the shooting, she felt something other than numbness. Gratitude, connection, recognition that she wasn't alone in this. 2 weeks later, the official investigation concluded. The King County Prosecutor's Office released a statement. After a thorough review of the evidence, including witness testimony, body camera footage, and forensic analysis, we have determined that the use of deadly force by Officers Hayes, Flores, and Kim was justified under Washington state law. No charges will be filed. The Seattle Police Department's Internal Affairs Division reached the same conclusion. Officers Hayes, Flores, and Kim acted in accordance with department policy and state law. Their actions prevented the death of a civilian and are commendable. Derek Vaughn's family released their own statement, delivered through their attorney. Our family is grieving the loss of Derek. While we understand the circumstances that led to his death, we believe he was failed by a system that should have provided him with support and accountability long before this tragedy occurred. We do not condone his actions, but we mourn the man he once was. It was a careful statement. Sad but not accusatory. Grief without defense. Ryan Caldwell was officially terminated from the Seattle Police Department. He did not appeal. He did not fight. He simply packed up his locker, turned in his badge, and disappeared. Lauren Hayes, the clerk from the Horizon Grand incident, had also been quietly terminated. She found work at a call center. She never spoke about what happened in that courtroom. And Gregory Vance, he was still awaiting trial for assault, abuse of authority, and contempt of court. His attorney was pushing for a plea deal. 5 years reduced to 2 with good behavior, but the prosecutor wasn't budging. This case had gone too public. There would be no deals. Audrey watched all of this unfold from a distance. She didn't give interviews. She didn't write op-eds. She didn't become the face of a movement. She just lived her life, quietly, deliberately, but the world wouldn't let her disappear. 3 months after the shooting, Audrey received an invitation. The mayor of Seattle wanted to honor her at a ceremony recognizing acts of courage and service. She would be awarded the city's Medal of Valor. Audrey didn't want it, but Jeffrey convinced her to go. Not for yourself, he said. For everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. For everyone who's ever been pushed out, pushed down, or pushed aside. You show up and you show them what resistance looks like. So she went. The ceremony was held at City Hall, a grand building with marble columns and high ceilings. The room was filled with city officials, community leaders, activists, and journalists. Audrey wore her navy dress uniform, ribbons and medals gleaming on her chest. Mayor Patricia Holden stood at the podium, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a reputation for straight talk. She looked out at the crowd and began. 3 months ago, one of our own was targeted, harassed, threatened, and ultimately attacked by someone who was supposed to protect and serve. Audrey Mitchell is a Navy SEAL, a veteran, a hero. But on that night, she was simply a woman defending her life. And she did so with courage, with grace, and with a strength that should inspire us all. The room erupted in applause. Audrey stood, walking to the podium. Mayor Holden draped a ribbon around her neck, the medal heavy against her chest. They shook hands. Cameras flashed. Then the mayor stepped aside and Audrey was left standing at the microphone. She hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't written anything down. She simply spoke from the place she always did, truth. I didn't come here to be a symbol, she said. I came here because I refused to be erased. Derek Vaughn tried to erase me, first in a traffic stop, then in a courtroom, and finally in a theater. But I'm still here, not because I'm special, because I refuse to disappear. The room was silent. Every day people like me are told we don't belong. We're stopped. We're questioned. We're made to prove our humanity over and over again. And most of the time we do it. We smile, we comply. We de-escalate. But sometimes no matter what we do, it's not enough. Sometimes the system fails. And when it does, we have to decide. Do we disappear? Or do we stand? She paused, her eyes scanning the room. I chose to stand. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And I'm standing here now to tell everyone watching that you don't have to be a SEAL to stand. You don't have to be a soldier. You just have to refuse to be erased. The applause started slow, then built, then roared. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Others nodded in recognition. Tyrone Jackson stood in the back, arms crossed, a proud smile on his face. Jessica Morgan was there too, camera in hand, capturing every moment. And in the third row, Officer Nina Flores sat in her uniform, clapping until her hands hurt. After the ceremony, Audrey stood in the hallway, surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, thank her, tell her their stories. She listened to each one. A woman who had been profiled at a department store. A man who had been stopped by police 17 times in 2 years. A teenager who had been suspended from school for defending herself against a bully. Each story was different, but they all ended the same way. Thank you for not backing down. Jeffrey found her an hour later, still talking to people. Ready to go? Audrey nodded. She said her goodbyes, walked out into the Seattle rain, and breathed. That night, alone in her apartment, Audrey finally allowed herself to feel it, all of it. The fear she had pushed down in the courtroom. The rage she had swallowed when Vaughn pulled that taser. The grief she had ignored when he died in front of her. She sat on the floor of her living room and let it come. Tears she hadn't cried in years. Sobs that shook her whole body. And when it was over, when the storm inside her had finally passed, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Part 5. 6 months after the shooting, Audrey Mitchell stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., addressing a room filled with lawmakers, activists, and journalists. She had been invited to testify before a Senate subcommittee on police accountability and reform. She hadn't wanted to come. Public speaking still wasn't her strength. But Jeffrey had reminded her again, your voice matters. Your story matters, so she came. The hearing room was intimidating. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, rows of senators sitting elevated above her, looking down like judges. But Audrey had faced worse. She adjusted the microphone, glanced at her notes, then pushed them aside. She would speak from memory. From truth. My name is Audrey Mitchell. I'm a former Navy SEAL and a veteran of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. I served my country for 8 years. I was honorably discharged. I came home believing that the rights I fought for overseas applied to me here. I was wrong. The room went quiet. 6 months ago, I was pulled over by Seattle police officer Derek Vaughn. My taillight wasn't broken. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But Officer Vaughn decided I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. He escalated the situation. He arrested me on false charges. And when I tried to defend myself in court, he tasered me in front of a judge, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. 4 days later, after a procedural error allowed him to post bail, Officer Vaughn came to kill me. He entered a community theater where I was speaking. He pulled a gun. He fired at me, and when I defended myself when I tried to disarm him, he pulled a second weapon. Seattle police officers shot and killed him before he could kill me. One of the senators, a woman from California, leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, in your opinion, what failed in this situation? Everything, Audrey said without hesitation. The traffic stop, the arrest, the charges, the bail system, the fact that an officer with multiple complaints was still on the street, the fact that no one intervened until it was almost too late. Everything failed. Another senator, an older man from Texas, spoke up. But the officers who responded to the theater, they did their jobs correctly, didn't they? They did. And I'm grateful they did. But they shouldn't have had to. Officer Vaughn should have been held accountable long before that night. The system had multiple opportunities to stop him. It didn't. What would you recommend? The California senator asked. Audrey looked directly at her. Real accountability. Not just policy changes on paper. Real consequences for officers who abuse their power. Independent oversight. Civilian review boards with actual authority. An end to qualified immunity that protects bad cops. And most importantly, a cultural shift. We need officers who see the people they serve as human beings, not threats. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Audrey answered every question with the same calm precision she had brought to every mission, every operation, every moment of crisis. She didn't grandstand. She didn't perform. She simply told the truth. When it was over, several senators approached her personally. They thanked her for her service. They promised to push for reform. Audrey nodded politely, but she didn't believe them. She had heard promises before. Outside the Capitol building, reporters swarmed. Audrey pushed through them with Jeffrey at her side. No comment, he said repeatedly. Ms. Mitchell has said everything she needs to say, but one reporter, a young black woman, called out. Ms. Mitchell, what do you want people to remember about your story? Audrey stopped. She turned back. I want them to remember that I'm not special. What happened to me happens to people every day. The only difference is I had the resources to fight back. Most people don't. So if you're going to remember anything, remember that. And do something about it. Then she walked away. Back in Seattle, life slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal. Audrey had started working with a local veterans organization, helping former service members transition back to civilian life. She found purpose in it. Connection. A way to use her skills for something other than survival. She also started training, not for combat, for herself. Therapy through movement. She joined a boxing gym in the Central District run by a former Marine named Corey Davis. He didn't ask questions, didn't treat her like a victim or a hero, just gave her gloves and pointed her toward the heavy bag. Audrey spent 3 mornings a week hitting that bag until her knuckles ached and her mind went quiet. It helped, not completely, but enough. One morning, while she was wrapping her hands, Nina Flores walked into the gym. She was out of uniform, wearing workout clothes, her hair pulled back. She spotted Audrey and hesitated. Audrey saw her and nodded. Nina approached slowly. Didn't know you trained here, Nina said. Started a few months ago. You? Just joined. Corey's a friend. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Audrey said, You want to spar? Nina's eyes widened. You sure? I'm sure. They moved to the ring. Corey watched from the corner, arms crossed, saying nothing. The 2 women circled each other, gloves up, testing distance. Then they started. Light at first, jabs, crosses, defensive movement. Then harder. Real contact. Real intensity. They went 3 rounds. By the end, both were breathing hard, sweating, grinning. "You're good," Nina said, leaning against the ropes. "So are you," Audrey replied. After that, they trained together twice a week. It became a routine, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. They didn't talk much about the shooting. Didn't need to. They both carried it, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the legal battles continued. Gregory Vance's trial finally began in King County Superior Court. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage. Witness testimony. Even Lauren Hayes testified against him, hoping for leniency in her own case. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harold Preston, the same judge who had been in the courtroom that day, delivered the sentence. "Gregory Vance, you abused your position of authority. You harassed, assaulted, and attempted to humiliate a woman who had done nothing wrong. You brought shame to this court and to the concept of justice itself. I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. No parole." Vance stood motionless as the bailiffs led him away. His face was blank, empty. He didn't look back. Audrey wasn't in the courtroom that day. She didn't need to be. Jeffrey called her with the verdict. She thanked him, hung up, and went back to what she was doing. Grocery shopping. Normal, mundane, alive. Ryan Caldwell, the officer who had drawn his weapon in the courtroom, was never charged. But his life had unraveled. He moved out of state working security at a mall in Arizona. He lived alone, drank alone, and every night, he thought about the moment he pointed that gun at Audrey Mitchell. He wondered if he would have pulled the trigger. He didn't know, and that uncertainty haunted him more than any answer could have. As for the Horizon Grand Hotel, Elena Ruiz had transformed it. Under her leadership, guest satisfaction scores soared. Staff retention improved, and the hotel became a model for inclusive hospitality. Aisha Carter visited quarterly, always unannounced, always checking to make sure the changes were real. They were. A year after the shooting, Audrey received a letter. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from Spokane. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Ms. Mitchell, you don't know me, but I was one of the officers who responded that night at the theater. I wasn't one of the ones who fired. I was backup. I got there just as it ended. I saw you standing over Vaughn's body. I saw your face. And I've thought about it every day since. I've been a cop for 12 years. I joined because I wanted to help people. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people. I started seeing problems. Threats, statistics, officers like Vaughn, like Caldwell, they were everywhere. And I said nothing. I looked the other way because it was easier. Because calling them out meant making enemies, meant risking my career. I'm writing this because I quit. I turned in my badge last week. Not because I'm running away. Because I realized I can't be part of a system that protects men like Vaughn. I'm going back to school. I'm going to be a social worker. I'm going to help people the right way. I'm telling you this because you need to know that what you did mattered. You didn't just survive. You changed things. You changed me, thank you." The letter wasn't signed. Audrey read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't know who wrote it. Didn't need to. The words were enough. 2 years after the shooting, Audrey stood in the same theater where Derek Vaughn had tried to kill her. It had been renovated. New seats, new lighting, a new mural on the back wall, painted by local artists, depicting the faces of community members who had fought for justice. Audrey's face wasn't among them. She had insisted on that. The theater was hosting a community event, Voices of Resistance. Speakers, poets, musicians, all sharing stories of survival and defiance. Tyrone Jackson had organized it. He asked Audrey to speak. She agreed. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage. The same stage where she had stood 2 years ago, staring down a man with a gun. But the energy was different now. Then it had been fear. Now it was hope. "My name is Audrey Mitchell," she began. "And 2 years ago, a man tried to kill me on this stage. He didn't succeed. Not because I'm stronger than him, but because I refused to let his hatred define my existence." The audience listened, silent and focused. "I've spent the last 2 years trying to make sense of what happened. Trying to understand why Derek Vaughn hated me so much. And the truth is, he didn't hate me. He hated what I represented. A black woman who wouldn't be silent. Who wouldn't comply. Who wouldn't disappear. And that scared him more than anything I could have done. She paused, looking out at the faces staring back at her, young and old, black, white, brown, all of them carrying their own stories. I'm not here to tell you how to fight. I'm here to tell you that the fight is worth it. That standing up even when it's dangerous, even when it's exhausting, even when you're scared, that's how we survive. That's how we win. The applause was immediate, sustained, genuine. After the event, people lined up to talk to Audrey. She shook hands, listened to stories, offered encouragement. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt something close to closure. That night, back in her apartment, Audrey sat on her couch with a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nina Flores. Saw the video from tonight. You killed it. Proud of you. Audrey smiled. Thanks. See you at the gym tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. Audrey set the phone down and stared out the window. The city lights of Seattle glowed against the night sky. Rain fell softly the way it always did. Somewhere out there, people were being stopped, questioned, harassed. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But for tonight, Audrey Mitchell was at peace. She had survived. She had spoken. She had stood. And she would keep standing. For herself. For the people who couldn't. For the belief that justice, however slow, however imperfect, was still worth fighting for. The story of Derek Vaughn and Audrey Mitchell didn't end with a gunshot. It ended with a choice. The choice to keep going. To keep believing. To keep fighting. And that choice made every single day by people who refuse to be erased. That's what changes the world. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But piece by piece. Person by person. Story by story. And Audrey Mitchell's story? It was just beginning. 5 years after the shooting, Audrey was invited to speak at the Navy SEAL Foundation's annual gala. She almost declined. She had left that life behind. But her former commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford, called her personally. Mitchell, he said, there are young women training right now who need to hear your story. They need to know that being a SEAL doesn't end when you take off the uniform. So she went. The ballroom was filled with active duty SEALs, veterans, their families, and supporters. Men in dress uniforms, women in elegant gowns. The weight of service hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone present. Audrey wore a simple black dress. No medals, no insignia. Just herself. She sat at a table with Bradford and 3 other former SEALs, all of whom had followed her story over the years. They talked about deployments, about the teams, about the brothers and sisters they had lost. It felt good, familiar, like coming home to a place she hadn't realized she missed. When it was time for her to speak, Audrey walked to the stage. The room fell silent. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces she recognized, teammates from her time in the service, instructors from Bud S, young women who had just completed training, their eyes bright with achievement and uncertainty about what came next. Audrey gripped the podium. Then she began. When I joined the Navy, I thought the hardest thing I would ever do was make it through Bud S training. The cold, the exhaustion, the instructors telling me I didn't belong, that I wasn't strong enough, that I would quit like all the others. But I didn't quit. I pushed through. And when I earned my trident, I thought I had won. She paused, her voice steady but weighted with experience. Then I deployed. Iraq, Afghanistan. I saw combat, lost friends, did things I'll carry for the rest of my life. And when I came home, I thought that was the victory, surviving, making it back alive. But what I learned is that coming home isn't the end of the fight. It's just a different battlefield. The room was absolutely still. 2 years after I left the Navy, a police officer tasered me in a courtroom. 4 days later, that same officer came to kill me. I defended myself. He died. And in the aftermath, people asked me how I stayed so calm, how I didn't panic, how I knew what to do. The answer is simple. You trained me. The Navy trained me, not just to fight, but to survive, to assess threats, to make decisions under pressure, to refuse to quit even when everything tells you to give up. She looked directly at the young women in the audience. If you're sitting here wondering if you made the right choice joining the teams, the answer is yes. But understand this, being a SEAL doesn't make you invincible. It makes you capable, and that capability will be tested in ways you don't expect, not just in combat, but in everyday life. You'll be underestimated, questioned, told you don't belong, and you'll have to decide every single day whether you're going to shrink or stand. Her voice grew stronger. I'm standing here tonight because I chose to stand. Because the Navy taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. That's what being a SEAL means. That's what service means. And that doesn't stop when you take off the uniform. It stays with you. In how you treat people. In how you demand to be treated. In how you refuse to let anyone tell you that you're less than you are. The applause started before she finished her last sentence. It built and built until the entire room was on its feet. The young women in the audience had tears streaming down their faces. The veterans nodded in recognition. And Bradford, standing in the back, raised his glass in silent salute.
After the event, Audrey was surrounded. Young SEALs wanting advice. Veterans wanting to share their own stories of coming home and facing new battles. Families thanking her for speaking truth they needed to hear. One young woman, maybe 25, approached hesitantly. "Ms. Mitchell, I just finished training. I'm heading to my first deployment in 3 months, and I'm terrified." Audrey looked at her. "Good. Fear means you understand what you're walking into. Don't lose that fear. Just don't let it control you." "How do you do that?" "You remember why you signed up, you trust your training, and you lean on your team." The woman nodded, then asked quietly, "Did it ever get easier? Being the only woman? Being underestimated?" Audrey shook her head. "No, but I got better at not caring. You will too." The young SEAL smiled, straightened her shoulders, and walked away with a confidence that hadn't been there before. 10 years after the shooting, Audrey Mitchell published a memoir. She hadn't wanted to write it, but a publisher had approached her, and Jeffrey had encouraged her to tell her story in her own words before someone else told it for her. The book was called Standing Ground: A Navy SEAL's Fight for Justice. It detailed her childhood in Atlanta, growing up in a single-parent home, her decision to join the Navy, her time in the SEALs, and everything that happened with Derek Vaughn. But it also went deeper. It explored the quiet battles veterans faced when they came home. The struggle to fit into a world that didn't understand what they had seen and done. The weight of being a black woman in spaces designed to exclude her. The book became a bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest, raw, unflinching. Audrey didn't hold back. She wrote about her mistakes, her fears, her moments of doubt. She wrote about the nights she couldn't sleep, haunted by faces of people she had killed in combat. She wrote about the guilt she felt for surviving when others didn't. And she wrote about the choice, every single day, to keep living. Book tours followed. Interviews, speaking engagements. Audrey traveled the country, talking to veterans groups, community organizations, schools, and police academies. Yes, police academies. She had been invited to speak to recruits about accountability, about seeing the people they served as human beings, about the difference between authority and abuse. At one academy in Chicago, a young recruit asked, "Do you hate cops?" Audrey looked at him. "No, I hate bad cops. There's a difference. I've met incredible officers, Nina Flores, Brandon Hayes, officers who risk their lives to protect people, who see their badge as a responsibility, not a weapon. Those officers deserve respect. But officers like Derek Vaughn, who abuse their power, who see certain people as less than human, those officers need to be removed. And the system that protects them needs to be dismantled." The room was silent, then the recruit nodded. "Fair enough." 15 years after the shooting, Audrey Mitchell stood in a different courtroom. Not as a defendant, as an expert witness. She had been called to testify in a civil rights case involving a young black man who had been shot by police during a traffic stop. The officer claimed the man had reached for a weapon. Video showed he had reached for his license. The man survived, but he was paralyzed from the waist down. Audrey's role was to provide testimony about threat assessment, use of force, and the reasonable actions of someone being stopped by police. She had done this several times over the years, using her SEAL training and her personal experience to help juries understand what actually constituted a threat versus what was perceived bias. The defense attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s, asked, Ms. Mitchell, in your military career, you were trained to identify and neutralize threats. Can you explain to the jury what factors you were taught to consider? Audrey faced the jury. We were trained to assess multiple factors: body language, hand placement, environmental context, intent versus capability. We were taught that perceived threat is not the same as actual threat, and we were held accountable for every decision we made. Every shot fired had to be justified. Every use of force had to be explained. And in your opinion, based on the video evidence in this case, did the plaintiff present an actual threat to the officer? No, the plaintiff was compliant. He announced he was reaching for his license. His movements were slow and deliberate. There was no weapon, no aggressive behavior, no threat. The defense attorney nodded. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. On cross-examination, the prosecutor tried to discredit her. Ms. Mitchell, you were involved in a shooting yourself, weren't you? You killed Officer Derek Vaughn. Audrey's expression didn't change. I didn't kill Officer Vaughn. Seattle police officers killed him after he fired his weapon at me and drew a second weapon. I defended myself until trained officers could respond. Their actions were reviewed and deemed justified. But you have a bias against police officers, don't you? No, I have a bias against officers who abuse their authority. There's a difference. The prosecutor tried several more times to shake her testimony, but Audrey remained calm, factual, unshakable. When she stepped down, the plaintiff's attorney whispered, "Thank you. You just won this case." The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found in favor of the plaintiff, $5 million in damages, and a recommendation for criminal charges against the officer. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Audrey how she felt. Justice isn't just about winning cases, she said. It's about changing the system so these cases stop happening. But today, justice was served. And that's something. 20 years after the shooting, Audrey Mitchell was 51 years old. She still trained at the gym with Nina Flores, though now they moved a little slower, laughed a little more. She still worked with veterans, helping them navigate the impossible transition from combat to civilian life. And she still spoke, still testified, still stood for the people who couldn't stand for themselves. Derek Vaughn was a memory now, a cautionary tale told in police academies and law schools, a name that appeared in textbooks about police accountability and reform. His death had sparked real change. Not everywhere, not completely, but Seattle had overhauled its use of force policies. Officer complaint systems had been reformed. Civilian oversight boards had real power now. And officers like Vaughn, officers with patterns of abuse, were being identified and removed before they could do irreparable harm. It wasn't perfect. The system still failed, but it failed less often. And when it did, there were people like Audrey Mitchell ready to stand up and say, "This is not acceptable. This will not continue. We will do better." On the 20th anniversary of the shooting, the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute held a memorial event, not for Derek Vaughn, for the movement that had grown from that night, for the activists, the reformers, the survivors who had turned tragedy into change. Audrey attended, sitting quietly in the back row. She watched young people take the stage and tell their stories, stories of being profiled, stories of surviving, stories of fighting back, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in herself, in them, in the next generation that refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Tyrone Jackson, now in his 60s and still organizing, took the stage. He looked out at the crowd and said, 20 years ago, a woman stood on this stage and refused to be erased. And because she stood, we all learned how to stand a little taller. That's the legacy. Not the violence, not the death, but the refusal. The absolute refusal to disappear. The crowd applauded. Audrey remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. After the event, people approached her. Younger activists who knew her story, veterans who had heard her speak, parents who wanted their children to meet her. She shook hands, posed for pictures, offered encouragement. As the crowd thinned, Nina Flores found her. "You okay?" Audrey nodded. I'm good, just thinking. About what? About how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Nina smiled. That's why we keep going. They walked out of the theater together into the Seattle night. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and clear. Above them, stars were visible for the first time in weeks. You know what I think about sometimes, Nina said. I think about that day in the courtroom when Vaughn tasered you, and I think about how easily it could have ended differently if you hadn't been strong enough, if we hadn't gotten there in time, if you had just given up and walked away. Audrey looked at her. But I didn't. No, you didn't, and that made all the difference. They stood there for a moment, two women who had met in the worst circumstances and had found friendship in the aftermath. Then they hugged, said goodnight, and went their separate ways. Audrey walked to her car, a newer model now, but still modest, still practical. She sat in the driver's seat and looked back at the theater. The lights were off. The building was quiet, but the energy remained. The memory, the resistance. She started the engine and drove home through the city she loved, past the Central District, where she had been pulled over all those years ago, past the courthouse where she had been tasered, past the VA hospital where she still volunteered, past all the places that had tried to break her and failed. When she arrived at her apartment, she parked and sat for a moment in the silence. Then she pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She typed a single sentence, something she had been thinking about all day. Standing ground isn't about refusing to move. It's about refusing to be moved. She saved the note and stepped out of the car. 20 years. 2 decades since a racist cop had tasered her in a courtroom. 2 decades since he had come to kill her and died instead. 2 decades of fighting, surviving, speaking, standing. And Audrey Mitchell was still here, still standing, still refusing to disappear. Because that's what warriors do. Not just in combat, but in life. They stand, they fight, they survive, and they make sure the next generation knows how to do the same. The story of Derek Vaughn ended with 3 gunshots in an empty theater. But the story of Audrey Mitchell? That story was still being written. One day, one choice, one stand at a time, and it always would be. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of race, gender, or background, share this story. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and speak up when silence is no longer an option. Because the only way we create change is by refusing to accept injustice. By standing when others sit. By speaking when others stay silent. By being the person who says, not today, not here, not anymore. That's the lesson, that's the legacy, that's the truth. And truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way to light.